Welcome into Sportsmemo's Betting Podcast with Mid-Major Matt. We're talking the AAC West Division here, college football preview podcast. Mid-Major Matt, welcome into the pod. How are you?
I am doing well. Got my Phil Steele in hand and ready to dive into it. And also waiting for these casinos to put out the rest of the win totals. I mean, there's all the big teams, but come on, where's all the AAC teams?
Absolutely, man. That is a topic that's at the top of my mind right now as well. I'm ready to jump on a flight and get out to Vegas ASAP as soon as they'll be out. Usually Chris Andrews, he's opened the market the last 2 years for all of the G5, the group of 5 teams. However, he even said publicly he's been sick up against it health-wise, so send it, any messages you would like to him. But it has affected the group of 5 season win totals for off-season play. So you haven't seen any sports books with any numbers up on these, huh, Mid-Major?
Well, some of Five Dimes has some of this stuff, but not a whole bunch of them. And then we just saw Circa release some of them, but nobody very small. So then that's where I think there's usually more value is some of these teams in the Conference USA and the Sun Belt and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's all the Power 5 teams. And, yeah, like you said, no one real small. Like, they'll throw it out on UCF and, like, UNLV out there in Vegas, like those type of teams. But, you're not getting Louisiana Monroe or anything like that, right, Matt?
Exactly. No, nobody's got Louisiana Monroe. And who knows, maybe there's going to be a number eventually released and we'll be able to hammer it.
We will, and hopefully we can put you on the right side of some of these moves, but let's get right after it. We'll go in ABC order in the Western Division of the AAC. We did the Eastern Division last week, so check it out there, sportsmemo.com on the podcast tab. I am Drew Martin. He's Mid-Major Matt, at Mid-Major Matt on Twitter. We'll start breaking it down now. We got the Houston Cougars, 8-5 last year, 5-3 in conference, just 6-7 against the number, Matt, and 9-4 towards the over. Big trender towards the over. How are you looking to bet Houston this year?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, they fired Major Applewhite after going 8-5 last year, and were able to bring Dana Holgorsen in. I mean, you don't often see a coach from the Big 12 jump all the way over to the AAC. I know Houston's got a humongous, budget with regards to coaches, but when you bring over Dana Holgorsen, you're going to expect fireworks on offense, and obviously with De'Ara King at quarterback, he had a good year last year with, this offense averaging just under 44 points per game. He had 36 touchdowns passing and just 6 interceptions. He's also got pretty much his whole wide receiving core back. Marquez Stevenson, Keith Corbin, you've got Courtney Lark. So this offense should be able to put up a boatload of points. Patrick Carr is back in the backfield. And as good as the offense is going to be, the defense could be quite the opposite. We know Ed Oliver graduated. We know he got drafted into the NFL. This team could play in a lot of shootouts this year, especially if the defense doesn't live up to snuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. Ed Oliver leaves, but I'm of the camp sometimes, Matt, where the best player, and we saw it towards the end. I mean, he was getting in a verbal argument with the head coach, walking off on the field one game I remember I was involved with, watching that happen. I'm of the camp, yes, he was the most talented player, but sometimes, especially if it's an attitude issue or something like that, you don't lose all that much by just one player exiting the team. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think if I don't know the exact date when the problem started, but if you look at the schedule last year, I mean, they started out 7-1 and then finished up 1-4. So you can kind of get an idea of when it may have happened, and you don't lose to teams like SMU and down the stretch, and they got crushed by Army. Not only is Ed Oliver gone, the 3 top linebackers are gone, top 3 cornerbacks, their top nickelback, and a defensive end. This team struggled down the stretch, giving up 52 to Memphis, 70 to Army. Week 1, they're against Oklahoma. That's going to be a big-time problem for them potentially if they don't figure out what's going on defense. So we may be looking at a lot of overs with Houston this year.
I could agree with that. I could see him going up and down the field. Good offense there. And like you said, question marks on the defensive side. We'll move down here to the Memphis Tigers. Just 8-6 last year. They did score over 600 points. What's that? 601 points on the season last year. That's the most in the conference. That's more than UCF, actually. They were 6-1 at home, 8-6 against the number. Also 8-6 small trenders towards the over. How would you look to bet Memphis this year, Mid-Major Matt?
Memphis is my pick to win the AAC West. Their non-conference slate, they get a really good one. I mean, they get an SEC school at home, so they get Ole Miss at home, and then they get Southern at home. They also play out of conference at South Alabama and at the aforementioned Louisiana Monroe. They got good news with Brady White. Brady White's NCAA career is going to get extended. They were hoping to get a redshirt year for him. Brady White's got his complement of weapons. Patrick Taylor at running back, DeMonte Coxey at wide receiver, and Joey Magnifico at tight end. Coxey is going to be another one of those guys in the long line of wide receivers at this place, because you remember Anthony Miller was really good, and there were some other corners or wide receivers on this team that made it in the pros. The defense also last year was very youngish. They had a lot of sophomores last year, and now you look at them and they've got a lot of juniors and seniors and 8 returning starters. This is a team that I think has all the pieces. Plus, I really like Mike Norvell as their head coach. He's 26-14 in his 3 years there. They're going to be a big-time favorite in a lot of their games in conference. They do travel to Temple. They do travel to Houston. They do travel to South Florida, who we talked about last week. So that's a bit of a concern. But I think Memphis is the team that's coming out of this AAC West.
And mid-major, Matt, that leads us up to the next team, Navy, the midshipmen. And we've seen this program kind of not headed in the right direction of recent. Just 3-10 last year in conference, just 2-6. They're having a tough. They couldn't travel at all. They were winless on the road at 0-7 against the number 4-8 and 7-6. Small trenders towards the over, but I would say that was more due towards their defense not being very good. Would you look for the midshipmen to turn it around, or still probably fading them this year?
You know, it's funny. I like betting the overs occasionally in Navy games, because when defenses aren't prepared for the triple option and when they don't have that extra week off you may see sometimes, they really do struggle with it. And Navy's one of those teams, yes, they could go on a 16, 17-play drive, grinding out 2-3 yards a carry, but they can also go one play, boom. Like if they get the right lanes and the right alleyways, they could go and break off some big things. And as you said, their defense last year allowed 33.5 points per game. So those are two of the things that are recipes for overs. Navy's non-conference schedule, as usual: Holy Cross, Air Force, Army, and at Notre Dame. So there's some potential for some wins there. Here's the thing: their offense only has a couple starters back now. Malcolm Perry, he's explosive. He is able to run this offense. He's done it in the past. He's a senior, but if you look at some of the other guys who are back, it's pretty much the fullback Nelson Smith and then their center. Other than that, it's pretty much a lot of new people. And, a team like this, they're going to grow up. But, you look at these AAC games, and I don't know if they have enough talent to keep up. They've got South Florida at home. They play at Houston. They play at Memphis in early September. And we know that the games against the other academies mean a little bit more to them than their conference games do. It could be another long year. They could push for bowl eligibility if things break right, but they could also be one of the worst teams once again if these guys that are relatively unproven don't prove themselves.
In mid-major, Matt, do you think Navy kind of benefits from being in the AAC, or do you think that it's actually a negative for the program?
It depends. On their years when they're good, then yes, it benefits them to be in a conference. But in years when they're not good, it's almost better for them to be like Army, play an independent schedule, be able to have some freedom as to who you may schedule. You may add another FCS team. Maybe if you're Navy, you play 2 of them. Maybe you play some Sunbelt schools, some Conference USA schools when you're not good. But when you're not good in a conference like this, especially since we talked about it last week, this is a conference that's on the rise right now. There are a lot of good teams in this league. Ken Niumatalolo is not a bad coach, but in years when they're down, playing in a real conference, they're going to be way down.
And when you start talk about, we did talk about it a little bit on last week's pod, doing the East Division. You can find that on sportsmemo.com. Just hit on the podcast tab, go back a couple podcasts, and you can find it, as well as all the other conferences that we're doing. We will hit on all of the college football conferences before week 1. But Mid-Major Matt, in your opinion, do you think the AAC is better than any of the power conferences?
Ooh, good question. I would say, I'm a champion, as you say, for these conferences. I think they could be on par with the Pac-12. Now, the top of the Pac-12 is better than the top of the AAC. Washington probably wins the AAC rather easily. Utah probably could win the AAC rather easily. Oregon maybe. But other than that, like Washington State, Stanford, a down USC team, a down UCLA team, I think the AAC has more depth than maybe the Pac-12. But I think the top of the Pac-12 is way better than the top of the AAC.
Really? Okay, so 9 conference games in the Pac-12, and you put UCF in the Pac-12. How do you think they do?
It depends. I mean, if you put them in the South with UCLA and USC and Arizona State, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, I mean, I think they're only worse than potentially Utah. Now, the travel would be a problem because they'd be traveling.
But it would also be a benefit.
It would because then you get the West Coast teams coming east. Mm-hmm. I think this is a UCF team that would probably be second place in the South right now because I think Utah's the best. And, you know, when you get to the Pac-12 stuff, I'm a really big fan of Utah this year. But, I mean, USC's down. Arizona State is mediocre. They lost a lot. Arizona lost a lot. Colorado's not very good. I think UCF in the Pac-12 South would probably be the second best team.
I agree with you. I think they'd be a notch below Utah, but outside of that, I could see him going toe-to-toe with almost anybody out there in the Pac-12. But good stuff here. Mid-Major Matt, at Mid-Major Matt on Twitter, breaking down the AAC West Division here. We'll move down a notch. We're going in ABC order. No disrespect to the last 3 teams we will break down. Talking about Southern Methodist up next. SMU, the Mustangs 5-7 last year, left out of a bowl game. 5-7 ATS, so also lost money for their backers, and at 5-7 trending towards the under. How would you look to bet SMU this year, Mid-Major Matt?
Well, I mean, SMU last year had a offense that was okay and had a defense that struggled a lot. They gave up over 35 points. They scored 30 points. Sonny Dykes is an offensive guy. I mean, he plays with a fast tempo. He uses the pass a lot, but he didn't have the right guys running the offense last year. Ben Hicks was okay, and he transferred out. Luckily, the school was able to bring in the Buechele kid from Texas. He's going to compete with William Brown, who has been in the system. He is a sophomore. Whoever wins this quarterback job will have his pick of the solid litter at wide receiver: Reggie Roberson, James Proche, Judah Bell. There's a decent tight end. I mean, they got to find some running backs, but you know Sonny Dykes wants to throw it. You know he wants to throw it often. He wants to throw it at a quick pace. So he's got to find the quarterback first. Everybody's going to assume Buechele's going to win the job coming over from Texas, but that's not a guarantee. On the defensive side, you've got 8 starters back. And I think for them, a lot of times you're going to say, okay, 8 starters back from a bad defense, it's not going to be very good. But I think you look at a guy like Richard Moore, the linebacker, 92 tackles and 5 sacks last year. They bring back a couple of solid safeties, some solid guys up front. I think this team's going to push for bowl eligibility this year. They're going to get around the 6-7 win mark. Out of conference, it's at Arkansas State, which will be a fascinating opener considering they're traveling to a Sun Belt team. And then they're playing against North Texas and Texas State and at TCU. So that's their first 4 non-conference games. They travel to South Florida. They travel to Houston and Memphis back-to-back. It'll be a struggle, but I think they can approach the 6 wins necessary to make bowl eligibility.
Yeah, I could see that. And, Sonny Dykes, what's your overall opinion of him? You know, he went for Louisiana Tech, made the trip out west to Cal. Had some success, but then it kind of trended off there for the Golden Bears. Are you overall kind of pro, or are you negative on the hire?
He's okay. I mean, he's been a bunch of different places. The funny thing is I found a stat regarding Sonny Dykes. At Louisiana Tech, he went 1-4, then 4-2, then 1-5, then 16-2. And then he went to Cal and went 1-11, 4-1, 1-6, then 5-0, and 1-5. So he's alternated streaks. Well, last year, the SMU went 0-3, then won 5 of 7, then lost 2 games to Memphis and Tulsa. So he's a very streaky guy. I don't like carrying stuff like that over from year to year. But when this team is in a groove and when his teams are in a groove, then he seems like a guy you want to bet on.
Yeah, I can always remember. He had that Louisiana Tech program rolling, man. And Mid-Major, you might know the history of kind of small conference college football dating back to that standpoint better than me. Those were kind of like my college years, but you're a young guy too, so I'm not sure. Was he the one that kind of built that Louisiana Tech kind of powerhouse, quote unquote, in Conference USA, or no, it was already kind of rolling before he got there?
He unfortunately didn't have a great year. I mean, he was 22-15 over his 3 seasons there. A lot of the stuff that I think you're talking about was done by Derek Dooley.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
I'm trying to remember if he had Tim Rattay at Louisiana Tech. I know I'm pretty sure one of the Rattays went to Louisiana Tech. Dykes he won Coach of the Year in the WAC in 2011, signed a contract extension, and then kind of left and went to California in 2012. And then he didn't really do much with Cal over those years because, he didn't exactly have much. Now, he did have Jared Goff at that time, so you can give some of the credit to him for what Jared Goff is going through. But, he went 22-15 at Louisiana Tech, 19-30 at Cal, and 5-8 so far at SMU.
Okay. And, that's always a tough ask. A guy goes from, Louisiana to the West Coast. It's just tough on recruiting. And he didn't recruit Goff. He inherited him as a redshirt freshman, but he did coach him up, so you got to give him some credit for that. But so I think it's a tough ask, cross-country with really any coach, so something to keep in mind. He's back in Texas, so could be a positive here for SMU going forward. We got Tulane up next, the Green Wave. They're in the state of Louisiana, 7-6 last year, 5-3 in conference. Talking about Tulane here, 6-7 ATS and 4-9. Big trenders towards the under. They had a good defense, good defensive line in particular. They held onto the ball pretty well. Willie Fritz, mid-major Matt, I'm sure you'll talk about it, from Georgia Southern, running that option style offense. Not necessarily triple option the veer, but option principles there. I like it. It's a fun offense to watch. How are you feeling about the Tulane Green Wave coming this year?
I like Willie Fritz. He took them in his 3rd year in New Orleans. Tulane made just its 2nd bowl in 16 seasons. That's a team that you don't expect much. It's funny, we do this thing, sometimes where we say, is it a basketball school or a football school? Well, I don't know if Tulane really is either of them, but I guess as of late, all the money they put into the stadium, that they're a football school. Tulane is an interesting team because, as you said, they run that style. It's not quite the triple option, but it's a veer thing. And Justin McMillan last year took over for Jonathan Banks.
He killed it.
Yeah, he was great. McMillan comes over from LSU. He won 5 of his 6 starts. He did enough in terms of passing to keep people honest. But the key is with an offense like this, your quarterback just has to be able to run it. He has to provide mobility so that way you can think he can pass and he can run, and he has to be able to throw the ball a little bit. And McMillan did that. His other weapons are Darius Bradwell in the backfield, had over 1,100 yards rushing. Darnell Mooney was the wide receiver. He approached 1,000 yards receiving. The question for the offense is the offensive line, outside of 2 starters, needs to be completely rebuilt. And that's another thing. When you have an option offense like this, your offensive line has to really know what they're doing, and that's a concern. On defense, the front 7 has pretty much everybody back. They're a youngish team. You look at some of these juniors and sophomores that are up front. They're a very aggressive bunch. The problem will be that their cornerback potential is not as good. They lost some key corners. They lost a key safety. Can they guard against the pass? Their non-conference schedule, FIU, at Auburn, Missouri State, and then at Army. There's some opportunities there for victories. They travel to Memphis, so that's tough. They travel to Temple. They get UCF at home. They get Houston at home. The question is, can they get any sort of home field advantage? Is there any sort of toughness to playing in Tulane? And I don't know if there is yet.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Great breakdown there. And they did get the on-campus stadium a couple years back. In terms of recruiting, mid-major, I know you know a lot about G5 recruiting. The state of Louisiana, everybody always talks about Florida, Georgia, California, Texas. Per capita, depending on the year, they have the most Division I recruits just for a smaller state. And being, you can make the argument Tulane is second only to LSU in the state. How do you think they'll do going forward as far as building the program, getting the recruits in?
Well, there's 2 sides to that. The first side is with playing the way they do, they kind of limit themselves on the athletes they can get on the offensive side of the ball. Mm-hmm. We're going to see at Georgia Tech how they handle transfer, getting away from the triple option and trying to run a pro-style offense with a lot of triple option recruits. So if they keep running this style, then as long as they find the right people, they're going to be able to run it properly. But when Willie Fritz leaves, if the next guy comes in and doesn't run the option, then they're in a bit of trouble. If they can get headlines, look, as you said, they've got the on-campus stadium. They made a bowl game last year. If they can keep that up and keep being respectable, then I think people in that area will – I mean, look, they're not going to get the guys who are going to LSU. They never will, most likely. But they can get those second-tier guys and keep them in the conference and keep them out of the Sun Belt, away from the Louisianas and some of the other schools in the area. If Tulane keeps winning, they can keep some of those kids in New Orleans.
And as far as like football philosophy goes with changing of styles, it seems like with Georgia Tech, you brought up, they're leaving the triple option and going to a more of a sling it around offensive approach. And a lot of people point towards, the triple option, it wasn't good, and they were tired of it kind of in Georgia Tech. It seems like I hear more of that from the talking heads. But when you go out and grade, the tenure over the last 10 years of them running the triple option, they went to the ACC championship, 2 or 3 times? They won one. They went to the Orange Bowl. I mean, and won the Orange Bowl. Georgia Tech, as far as the last